Imagine a feast hall in medieval Europe. Drums pounding, torches blazing, laughter echoing against stone. But in the corner, one child does not clap, sing, or smile. He rocks silently, the villagers whisper. Not about shyness, but curses. A child who doesn't speak, doesn't meet their eyes, must be touched by demons. To them, silence carried a dangerous meaning. In medieval Europe, there was no word for autism. No science, no psychology. Only suspicion. Different meant dangerous. And for children, different could mean punishment, exile, or death. But silence was not safety. It was the start of a nightmare. Parents prayed at altars, begging saints for healing. They offered coins, bread, even locks of hair. Anything to fix the child who would not speak or behave as others did. Whispers grew darker. If prayer failed, suspicion fell on mothers. Had she angered God? Or worse, had she lain with demons? Blame often crushed women before it touched the child. Some claimed these children were changelings, fairy offspring swapped at birth. If true, then their real baby was gone forever. The child before them was considered less than human. To test for changelings, families tried cruel tricks. Some placed the child on a shovel, holding them over fire. Others forced bitter herbs into their mouths to drive spirits out. If the child screamed, it proved possession. If silent, it proved stubborn evil. Either way, the outcome was pain. For some, these trials ended a short life, and yet survival was possible, but only in the shadows. Some parents hid their children. A quiet corner, a locked attic, or behind monastery walls. Silence became both prison and shield. Discovery could mean ruin for the entire family. A few monasteries sheltered them as holy innocents. A child who could not speak or conform was sometimes seen as closer to God. But protection was rare and dangerous. When harvests failed or plague struck, suspicion returned. Communities asked, had the strange child cursed them? Difference became scapegoat, and fear demanded blood. Sometimes the family paid that price. One chronicle tells of villagers casting stones at a boy who didn't speak. They believed stoning would force the demon out. Instead, it silenced him forever. But others chose stranger paths of healing. Some healers claimed boiling herbs or animal blood could cleanse children. They forced bitter brews down their throats. But instead of miracles, many children grew weaker, poisoned by the cure itself. In villages, fools were mocked in public squares. Silent or stimming children risked being branded village idiots. Laughter was not harmless. It cemented their fate as spectacles, stripped of dignity and humanity. Others were locked away by parents, not out of hatred but survival. Better hidden than accused. A child's silence echoed inside dark rooms while seasons passed outside unseen. Clergy sometimes declared such children God's fools. Neither fully damned nor blessed, they were caught between worlds. That title carried both protection and curse, shielding them, yet marking them forever. In wealthier homes, noble children who showed strange behaviors were hidden from courts. Their existence erased from records, their names never written, as if silence itself could keep bloodlines pure. But for commoners, there was no luxury of hiding. Fields needed hands, mouths needed feeding. A child who didn't fit became another burden on already starving families. Some families abandoned them at monasteries, believing monks could protect what they could not. But not every door opened. Some were turned away, left outside to freeze, but even inside monasteries, safety was never guaranteed. Inside, children were sometimes exploited, used as laborers in fields, cleaners in kitchens. Their silence mistaken for obedience, their fear mistaken for faith. They were worked until they broke. Those who survived childhood often became wandering outcasts. Some begged in markets, mocked as mad. Others roamed forests, whispered about as half human, half spirit. Solitude was safer than society, but legends grew. Some said these children could see visions, others couldn't. Their silence became prophecy, their stims seen as divine signs. Fear sometimes shifted into reverence, though never safety. In rare cases, one child's silence saved them. Declared holy, paraded through streets as a living relic. But their body was still owned, their life never truly free. For most, survival was fragile. Each day was a gamble between cruelty and mercy, superstition and chance. Silence was their shield and their sentence, but this was only childhood. What awaited them in adulthood was even harsher. Adolescence was dangerous. A child who didn't speak, farm, or pray correctly risked being branded unteachable. Families faced pressure, keep them and starve, or cast them out. Survival narrowed with age, villagers whispered curses. Epileptic seizures, now believed divine punishment, were often confused with autism. Communities believed such children carried sin, spreading misfortune wherever they lived. Fear turned into scapegoating. Many adolescents became test subjects. Traveling healers tried charms, bloodletting, even burning skin with hot irons to release demons. Their suffering became public spectacle, sold as cures for coin. Those who resisted became entertainment. Fools' festivals paraded the strange. A boy's repetitive movements were mocked as comedy. Crowds laughed, never knowing the terror behind his silent stare. But laughter wasn't the cruelest punishment. If a noble household took in such a child, it wasn't compassion. They became curiosities, decorations at court, half pet, half toy, valued for strangeness but never for humanity. Punishments for idleness were brutal. Teenagers unable to obey commands faced whipping, shackling, or expulsion. Villages had no space for weakness. Cruelty was rationalized as survival. In monasteries, discipline was stricter. Silence was holy, but disobedience was sin. Autistic children who failed to follow chants or prayers were beaten to drive faith into them. Those who survived this gauntlet sometimes turned feral. Abandoned teens roamed forests, living on roots and streams. They became whispered myths, wild children who weren't quite beasts, yet no longer welcomed as human. But even wild children weren't safe. Hunters sometimes captured them, dragging them back to villages. Chained like animals, they were mocked or sold, living proof of society's obsession with ownership. Some families, desperate, delivered their children to shrines. Priests promised healing through relics and relic water baths. But hope was thin, and most children left as broken as they arrived. At times, noble families exploited superstition. Strange children were displayed as omens, living signs of God's wrath or favor. They weren't people in these tales. They were warnings written in flesh. Even survival brought no mercy. Adolescents were pushed into fields or kitchens, expected to labor silently. If they faltered, punishment was swift, proof that society demanded function, not existence. But adulthood would turn their silence into something even more dangerous. By adolescence, marriages were arranged. Strange children had no prospects. They were excluded from alliances, leaving them vulnerable. Outsiders, even in bloodlines, treated as expendable burdens or discarded altogether. Some were pushed into monastic vows they couldn't consent to. Labeled God's servants, they became permanent laborers within cloisters, their silence mistaken for devotion, their lives signed away in ink. Others became scapegoats in crises. Failed harvest, illness? The strange youth became accused. Their difference made them easy targets when fear needed someone to blame. Superstition ran deep. Some were accused of witchcraft or possession, especially girls. Their quietness, their repetitive movements, became evidence of demonic touch. Trials often ended in fire. Even nobles weren't immune. A silent daughter might vanish from records, quietly confined in convents. Their stories ended not in violence, but in erasure, lives deleted from memory. A few rare cases found safety. Monks who pitied them offered protection, treating them as divine innocent. But safety meant cloistered silence, a cage mistaken for sanctuary. But even those who found protection discovered adulthood carried harsher cruelties. By adulthood, autistic individuals faced impossible odds. Few lived long. Malnutrition, abuse, or exposure cut lifespans short. For many, reaching 20 was itself a quiet miracle. Those who endured became beggars. Markets saw them as background scenery, human reminders of poverty. Their silence was not choice, but the last language left to them. Yet, scraps of compassion surfaced. A widow offering bread, a monk whispering prayer. Brief kindnesses reminded them, if only fleetingly, that humanity was not entirely lost. Still, survival was fragile. Winter claimed many. Exposure on frozen roads left their bodies unmarked by family, buried nameless in common graves, forgotten twice over. Yet legends survived. Stories of silent saints, fools who spoke prophecies, or children who carried hidden wisdom. History erased names, but folklore whispered echoes of their truth. But these stories were rare. For most, adulthood was just survival, silent, forgotten, erased from chronicles. Their fate was sealed not by demons, but by indifference. What society feared most was not silence, but inheritance. What happened when such children grew into parents? Adulthood meant scrutiny. A man who couldn't speak or manage land risked losing inheritance. Families sometimes hid such sons, locking them away so rivals couldn't exploit weakness. Land was wealth. A silent heir endangered dynasties. Families petitioned priests or kings to declare them unfit. Their lands reassigned, their voices stolen by parchment and seal. For daughters, inheritance was marriage, but a strange woman was rarely chosen. Some were quietly placed in convents, their dowries taken by abbots. Erased not by death, but by veils, others were used as pawns. Strange heirs married off cheaply, binding alliances no one else wanted. They were tokens in political games, traded like land or cattle. But even marriage brought dangers no vows could protect them from. Marriages weren't protection. Many were exploited, beaten for obedience, mocked for silence, or discarded when heirs didn't come. Their otherness became lifelong chains. Children born from these unions carried the stigma. Villagers whispered curses, claiming madness was inherited. Families hid them again, repeating the cycle, silence birthing silence across generations. Some autistic adults found roles, keepers of animals, mill attendants, or toll collectors. Jobs requiring silence became refugees, though always precarious, one mistake away from punishment. Yet, success could backfire. A skilled miller who worked alone too efficiently might be accused of sorcery. Achievement itself became suspicious when wrapped in silence. In a world that feared difference, even survival invited suspicion. The church sometimes intervened. Priests labeled such men innocents, holy fools spared from judgment. Protection came at a price. Their lives became performance, examples of God's mystery. But sanctity didn't always protect them. Holy fools mocked kings with truth and were beaten or executed. Their survival balanced on nobles' shifting moods. Others disappeared into monasteries, not by choice but coercion. Silence mistaken for piety turned them into permanent laborers, bodies consumed by candle smoke and endless toil. Those who resisted confinement often vanished from records. Outcasts left villages, wandering roads as beggars. Their names never written, their stories erased with each passing winter. But sometimes, silence became power. The power to endure where others broke. Some autistic adults survived precisely because they were overlooked. Their silence made them invisible, escaping conscription, taxes, or feuds that killed others. Anonymity became armor, yet invisibility brought its curse. If a crime went unsolved, suspicion fell on the quietest. Their silence was twisted into guilt, and punishments swift. Punishments were brutal, branding, exile, or hanging. Silence was no defense. Law demanded confession, but those unable to speak were condemned without words. Even survival after trial brought shame. Exiled, their names scraped from parish rolls, families forced to pretend they never existed. Erasure became worse than execution, and yet rare exceptions existed. Chronicles mention hermits, men who spoke little, living in caves or huts, revered as holy despite strangeness. Silence became sanctity, but hermits lived on margins, revered one day, abandoned the next. Their sanctity could vanish with famine or war, leaving them exposed once more to the mob's cruelty. Adulthood offered no escape, only shifting cages of suspicion, silence, or exploitation. And yet, their legacy was not entirely erased. Some left traces in church margins, doodles, strange symbols etched into manuscripts by anonymous hand. Historians suspect these silent marks belong to those otherwise forgotten. These tiny drawings hint at minds that saw the world differently. In a society that erased them, ink became rebellion, survival carved into parchment. Such fragments remind us, even in erasure, lives leave shadows. The silent were never absent. They were written between lines, overlooked by power, but never gone. Legends sometimes kept their memory. Folk tales of silent wanderers with hidden wisdom endured. Stories, villages, told by firelight, perhaps inspired by those who couldn't speak. Adulthood brought no freedom. Their difference became crime, their silence became guilt, and survival meant invisibility. But invisibility carried its own weight, erasure from history itself. Yet the traces remain. Margins of manuscripts, whispered folk tales, scattered bones in unmarked graves. All proof that their silence was not absence. They lived, endured, and left marks power never intended. But how did society truly remember them? Or did it deliberately choose to forget? Memory in the Middle Ages was selective. Autistic lives rarely entered chronicles but lingered in whispers. Strange neighbors, silent kin, mysterious wanderers. History erased them, but folklore refused to forget. In folk tales, silence became magic. A boy who never spoke was said to understand birds. A girl who stared endlessly was believed to see spirits others could not. Yet wonder often shifted to fear. Villagers said a child staring too long could curse cattle or spoil crops. Silence turned into superstition, and superstition into accusation. But what happened when superstition reached the courtroom? Superstition soon fed trials. Inquisitors saw silence as proof of witchcraft. Children who couldn't speak were pressed, tested, accused, suffering under laws they couldn't even comprehend. Some were spared only because priests declared them innocents. Their inability to answer questions became divine evidence, a fragile shield in courts hungering for scapegoats. Others weren't spared. Whispers of witchcraft followed them into adulthood, branding them dangerous. Trials rarely ended in acquittal, silence interpreted as confession, the verdict already written. Folklore twisted even kindness. A quiet healer was branded sorcerer. A patient child was rumored possessed. Difference never stood alone, it was reshaped into fear. But not all stories ended in fire. Some carved unexpected reverence. In some regions, autistic adults were revered as seers. Their silence became wisdom, their strange focus a prophecy. Villagers sought their blessings before battle or harvest. But reverence was unstable. If crops failed, if storms struck, the same seer once honored became cursed, beaten, or driven away. Praise turned to persecution overnight. Families, fearing such turns, erased memories themselves. They destroyed letters, denied kinship, and married off sisters without mention of silent brothers. Forgetting was a survival tactic, but memory persisted in songs. Ballads of silent wanderers or sorrowful sisters carried fragments of truth. What history erased, folk music preserved in melody and rhyme. But where history failed, archaeology began to speak centuries later. Burials reveal what words hid. Some graves show skeletons with deformities linked to autism, buried hastily, in isolation, without markers. Lives erased even in death. Others were buried with families, suggesting quiet acceptance. Some communities may have seen difference not as curse, but as part of God's creation. Archaeologists uncover wear on bones, suggesting repetitive motions, familiar rocking or hand movements carried through adulthood. These silent gestures endured, etched permanently into the body. Science reveals what chronicles ignored. Silent children grew into silent adults, leaving traces not in words but in bone, soil, and objects left behind. But how does silence echo through centuries into our world today? Echoes remain in myths of holy fools, in lullabies about quiet wanderers, in whispers about cursed children. Medieval silence never fully vanished, it became shadow. Modern researchers trace these myths, uncovering hidden references to real autistic lives erased from records. History left gaps. Folklore filled them with fragments of truth. Through archaeology, folklore, and genetics, we see their existence confirmed. They were here, they lived, they suffered. And sometimes, they survived. Their silence echoes louder now than it ever did then. Still, the most haunting truth is this. Medieval society often chose forgetting. Silence was easier than acceptance, and so erasure became tradition. Yet forgetting is never complete. Every erased life left ripples through folklore, superstition, and faint historical traces, reminders that silence is never truly silent. Today, historians reassemble those ripples, honoring lives erased by fear. Their silence becomes testimony, their survival a mirror reflecting society's cruelty and resilience. The medieval world tried to bury their stories, but the past resists burial. Silence endures, not absence, but persistence. Every forgotten child left an echo, and those echoes, layered together, form a hidden chorus, a testimony to endurance across centuries of erasure. Their silence was never emptiness. It was survival, misunderstood and feared, yet still present in our world. Their stories linger, waiting to be heard, waiting to be remembered. But what if the silence of the medieval world is still shaping how we see difference today? The Middle Ages tried to erase autistic children by fire, silence, and superstition. But history whispers, their absence itself became proof of their presence, a shadow cast across centuries. When we search medieval chronicles, the silence is deafening. No names, no records. Yet archaeology, folklore, and DNA force us to admit they were there. Always. That silence wasn't passive. It was chosen, an act of forgetting, a shield for society against difference it could not accept. Erasure disguised as order, but is silence only a medieval cruelty? Or is it still alive today? Think of modern institutions. Families still whisper, schools still mislabel, governments still forget. The medieval erasure never ended, it simply changed clothes. Autistic voices were silenced then. Today, many still fight to be heard. The echo stretches from monastery walls to our present. But every silence hides a chance for revelation. By uncovering forgotten lives, we restore dignity stolen by centuries. Their silence becomes our responsibility to break the most chilling truth. Many medieval families didn't see their children as broken. They saw them as burdens. And burdens were disposable, but burdens to one world can become treasures to another. Modern science values what was once erased. Autistic focus builds discoveries. Autistic perspective reshapes art. Traits once branded curses are now sparks of human evolution. And so the question lingers. What brilliance did medieval cruelty bury? What songs, inventions, or insights died in silence, never reaching our world? Each erased child left an empty seat at humanity's table. We will never know what was lost, but we can choose not to repeat the silence. Their fate wasn't just medieval, it's a warning. Forgetting difference is the first step toward cruelty. Remembering is the first step toward survival. History doesn't owe them justice. We do. By telling their stories, we break the chain of silence that stretched from monastery to marketplace. They weren't curses. They weren't burdens. They were children, different, vulnerable, human, and humanity failed them. So when you think of the Middle Ages, remember not just kings, knights, or battles, but the silenced voices hiding between the lines. Silence was their survival. Now survival demands we listen. Their story is incomplete until we tell it, until we refuse erasure. The nightmare of silence is also its irony. The more they erased, the louder their absence grows across history. But are we really listening today? Or are we repeating the same erasure in silence of another kind? The medieval world teaches us this. Cruelty begins with forgetting. Compassion begins with remembering. Which path will we choose? Every forgotten life demands remembrance. Every silence demands breaking. The cost of ignoring is too great. So tonight, when silence surrounds you, think of them. The children erased, the voices lost, the echoes that still haunt our world. Their silence isn't just history, it's prophecy. Ignore it and we repeat it. Remember it and we honor them. Their absence is still present. Their silence is still speaking. And it's asking us one haunting question. Would you have erased them too? Or would you have chosen to remember? We cannot answer for the past, but we can answer for today. We must, because silence killed them once. Silence will kill again. Unless we remember, unless we speak. Their story is unfinished. It ends only with us, and this was only one silence. But what if you had to survive the medieval asylum, where chains and darkness replaced family? Tell me, would you have survived? Subscribe. Survival only gets harder.